Ladies and gentlemen, it's starting to feel a lot like 2009 because Twilight is back, and Josh and I might just be Team Jacob. Let's talk about that. Josh is giving me such a death glare. He agreed to this too.
He needed that moment of silence so you would have to grapple with what you just did. I knew it was going to be bad. I didn't know it was going to be that bad.
So
It didn't even kind of... Anyway.
I'm Pastor Ben Oschlager here in here in Pontiac, Michigan, but of Good Shepherd in Lake Orion, Michigan. With me again, as always, Josh Laborious of good old Friendswood, Texas. And it's
questioning
Hope, right?
being here as always.
Hope Lutheran Church, your new church?
Hope Lutheran Church in Friendswood, Texas.
Anyway.
And
today...
welcome.
No, go ahead.
All right. Oh, okay. Welcome to Season 7, Episode 5 of Cross-Checking. Today we're not talking about Twilight any more than Ben has forced us to. But where this comes from, and here was the direction I was going to go, which, made sense. For those
I'm just saying we're aggressively anti-Silver Bullet.
Yes, you didn't make that connection, though. Anyway, so, ladies and gentlemen, a parable for you, if you would. Or an analogy. I don't know what the difference is anymore. I do know the difference.
I've broken his brain.
Don't comment the difference between an analogy and a parable. I am familiar.
You took an English class.
Long ago, but not as long ago as we would wish it to be, there were these traveling salesmen who sold snake oil. Well, they didn't all sell snake oil. They all sold bottles of something.
I honestly thought you were just going to start telling the story or the plot of The Music Man.
I've never seen or heard of that.
Never mind.
Anyway, so they would sell this stuff, and they were called snake oil salesmen, and it's a phrase, it's still a phrase today, but there aren't a ton of, it's not regular use. Like, if you were listening to this podcast and you're like, I've never heard the phrase snake oil salesman before, that doesn't shock me, right? But the idea was these salesmen would go around with just a bottle of who knows what, telling people this is going to cure every problem you have. Doesn't matter. You have headaches? Cured. Your arm fell off? Cured. You're going blind in your left eye? Cured. You hear demons in your head? Cured. And I'm not, the last part, you're like, oh, he's exaggerating with demons. No, I'm fairly certain some of these guys probably sold them as tools for spiritual warfare, too. Okay? But at the end of the day, it was a bottle of snake oil or a bottle of tree sap or something that, if you were lucky, it wasn't going to hurt you, but it certainly was not going to fix all these problems.
My favorite part is it often had cocaine in it.
Which, might solve some of those problems. It might cause a whole host of other ones, but remember we did an episode on drug use way back in the day. I think that was a season 1. Anyway, today we're talking about the same, and Ben mentioned it with his Silver Bullet intro that almost landed. And this idea of snake oil, because...
Comment below if you're a Twilight fan.
Or don't. Because today we're talking about things, call them silver bullets in the church. And this is something that, if I had my brothers, we would just kill it. We would stop. Because the form that it takes is generally, it's programs. It's like, oh, you're struggling with this in your church? Well, buy this program, or buy this curriculum, or do this thing, or go to this conference, and it'll fix all your problems. Okay. And it's a promise of a silver bullet. Mm-hmm. Very rarely do they work as intended. And when they do work, I don't think it's because of them that they worked. It's because of the people who were implementing the program or the volunteers that it kind of pulled it. It's almost the side effect of the program is more worthwhile than the program itself. Okay? Yeah. And that's kind of what we're talking about. So if we want to start, do we want to maybe talk about just some examples of these programs that we're talking about? Do you think that's helpful, Ben?
Yeah, you want me to kill a big one right off the bat?
Go for it.
VBS. Straight for the jugular, Josh. Straight for the jugular.
You're going to get me fired.
I love VBS. Don't get me wrong. I think it's great to have kids come learn about Jesus for a week and get consistent time with them. It is not going to fix your church's problems with youth ministry.
Okay, I'm on board with you.
Cool.
I rescind all of my skepticism that I expressed in my body language.
Cool. Yeah, no, like I said, I love VBS. I think it can be a great opportunity for kids to get some sort of kind of foundational piece of understanding about God, especially some of the programs that like Concordia Publishing House has been putting out lately, or a lot of the other groups have really stepped up their VBS game. When I was growing up, it was awful. Like, you'd show up, you'd play games, and you'd go home, and Jesus would kind of get mentioned at some point, but it was not like cohesive. It was not building towards helping you understand something about God or the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. It was fun, and it made me kind of want to be around church, but it didn't really teach me anything about God. But I think the programs that have come out more lately have certainly been better about doing that. And so I will give them credit for that.
Yeah. Well, and I think there are some things we need to realize with VBS. Is it a really cool thing for the kids? Yes. Is it an opportunity for ministry? Without a doubt. Does it get overstated a lot? Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's not going to, like, having a really good VBS is not suddenly going to bring all these young families into your church.
Yeah.
Because if we're being honest, and on this podcast, we're in the business of being honest, most families, yours is not the only VBS they're going to. Because frankly, for a lot of people, it's
free
daycare.
Yeah, free childcare.
So you're this week, next week is the church down the way, next week is the church down the way.
Mm-hmm.
Which is cool because the kids are receiving the gospel proclaimed in a lot of these places. Because Jesus is very frequently the focus of, called the VBS curriculum. But if you're like, this is how we're going to get young families in, probably not, if we're being honest. And the other problem that this might be a silver bullet aimed at is to disciple kids.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? If 1 week a year the kids are being discipled, they're being taught who God is and who he has called them to be. And the other 55 weeks of the year, they're being formed by the world and by their sports teams and by their school and by everything else. They're being discipled by everything else. They're not being discipled first and foremost by the church. So we're saying, well, we want to disciple kids. Events like VBS can be great, but I think the focus needs to shift from we're discipling kids to we are setting kids up for continuing discipleship. So the lessons aren't just, here are some things to know. The lessons are, here are some things to know, and here's how we continue to build on this.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that work has to be done with the parents because, frankly, fifth graders cannot drive themselves to church. Yeah, another program. This is a favorite one for me to pick on. And I think I've probably done it once or twice on this show before. And that is evangelism programs.
Mm.
Who's programmatized evangelism? You have big one was Evangelism Explosion. That was a big one. Frank, that was a big one at the church where I grew up. Evangelism Explosion was a program they did for a long time. They might still do it. I'm not sure. Another one, and I don't know if this one is good or not because I've never used it myself. Everyone His Witness is one that's put out by CPH. And it gives you, and here's the thing. And this, just like VBS, there's some nuance here. Okay, if you say, we're going to do this evangelism program, and especially if that program is social media ads and advertising, okay, that doesn't work because your target audience are people who don't believe and who is going to change their worldview because they saw a snappy advertisement. Not very many people, okay? But when you you boil it down to a program, then people, first of all, people are like, oh, I haven't been through the program, I can't do it. So you're undercutting, call it your organic evangelism a little bit. But also, evangelism, like bringing the gospel to someone is the work of knowing them for months and years, for knowing who they are, what they struggle with, for reaching them in a way that is personal. And you can't program that. You can't say, well, here's your script, here's your steps 1, 2, 3, go do it. Now there's a caveat here, and I actually think this might be what everyone has witness focuses on. So I might have to correct that.
Eat some crow.
Yeah.
I'll let you know if you're wrong.
But
I've done it.
The good thing, like equipping people to evangelize and saying, here are some topics to bring up, here are some questions to ask, here are some things to listen for, like giving people some strategies, some approaches to those conversations, that can be incredibly helpful. It's a confidence builder. It helps people to get some sort of grip on intentionally doing this thing. So that is good. Don't hear me wrong. Equipping people for evangelism is a good, wholesome thing for churches to do. But if you're sitting there thinking, we're going to pay for this program, we're going to do this program, we're going to bring in this consultant, whatever, for our evangelism, it's not a silver bullet. And the reality is, if people are not willing to step up and people aren't willing to have those conversations, you can have a program till you're blue in the face, but you're just talking in circles amongst yourselves. Because at the end of the day, evangelism has to be done by people on the ground, by you who are listening to this in the communities that you are part of. Eventually, like, someone's got to step up to the plate, and a program cannot do that for you. Yeah, evangelism programs, not a silver bullet. Build relationships instead.
I will say, for dinner. Everyone who's witnessed does a good job of leaning into the idea that the majority of people who are going to like look out or like seek out a new church or seek out a church period, having not been a part of one or having kind of fallen away from the faith, they're going to do that out of relationship. It does a really good job of leaning into that conversation and then kind of giving you some things to look for in terms of like, is this person struggling primarily with a sin issue or primarily with a lack of gospel issue? I do think it does a good job. So that one's not necessarily programmatizing it the same way that Evangelism Explosion is. I will give it some credit there. Is it a perfect thing that, like, if you do it with your church is going to suddenly fix your evangelism? No. And that's where it can get dangerous.
Right. You'll notice, I mean, we've only done 2 so far, but a pattern here. Good things, but if you think they're going to suddenly fix your problems in a certain area,
yep,
they can become counterproductive.
Yes. Yep.
This is going to be a theme. Spoiler alert. What else what other sacred cows do we want to defecate on, Ben?
I think my favorite, like, every church that I have ever interacted with has at some point said something like, we need a young adult group, and then no one actually knows how to do that well. And I honestly think there really isn't a way to do that well, because the term young adult is so stinking anomalous. What churches need to do is just invest their time and energy in creating real fellowship opportunities rather than just like creating a group and hoping that it'll fix the problem of this group not showing up consistently or that group not showing up consistently. Like, invite
they won't
people
join our big club, so we're going to make a smaller sub club for them to join.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, it's not actually going to fix the problem. If you want young adults to show up, talk to young adults about Jesus.
Yeah,
and then show them that you care about them, and they will want to come back.
Yeah. And I think in addition, and this I think is true with young adults, this is true with any of these subgroups that we get so worried about, create opportunities for them to build relationships with the rest of the congregation. And if you're like, well, they're not here to build relationships, okay, so do things that they actually want to go to, okay? So if you're like, well, we always have our, trying to pick one that like no one's gonna get upset by. Here's one that I'm gonna get upset by, so I'll use it because then we can be upset together if you're listening to this and you're upset about it. Okay? If you were to have a Pinochle night, Pinochle is one of my favorite card games. I love playing Pinochle. Grew up playing with my family. It is, however, an old person's card game. Okay, the people I have talked about Pinochle with, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we play Pinochle." They're all over 60, almost without fail. Okay, so if you're like, we're going to have this fellowship opportunity and we're going to do a pinochle night, you shouldn't be surprised if young adults don't come. So if you are in the church and you are worried about young adults being a part of the church, start by sucking it up and saying, I am going to engage in a fellowship opportunity that I am not thrilled about. You're already here, so swallow your own preferences, swallow your own ego, and say, hey, I'm going to go suck at Mario Kart for a night. And if you're listening to this and you're an older person and you're like, I don't know anything about video games, doesn't matter. In fact, it's almost better if you're bad. Because you're saying, I'm willing to embarrass myself a little bit. That might be a little bit of a strong way to put it, but I'm willing to do that because it'll give me this opportunity for fellowship with young adults. Because, and I don't know if this is true across the board, everybody is their own person. All I'm saying is the seminary is filled with guys who are young adults. And I don't know if you remember these, Brad. My first 2 years there, we did SEMLAN, which LAN is local area network. So you're playing video games. We did video game tournaments. With the exception of Oktoberfest, those were the best attended events on campus from the student body. Because, especially the more casual video games, a lot of younger guys love playing those games. Like here's an example, because there is, here at Hope, there is our week, we don't really have non-existent demographics, but our weakest demographic is probably our single adults. I don't know about the single ladies. Beyonce can worry about that. But I bet if I hosted a Call of Duty tournament upstairs, I bet if I hosted a Call of Duty tournament upstairs, we would have a bunch of people on campus that we don't usually see on campus. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel that way. We have a gym, so we have, at this point, almost weekly church pickup basketball games. And
well, that's how Ben hurts himself so often.
It's true. It's true. Worth it, though. Like, there are guys there, preschool parents, community people, that, like, we just don't see very often apart from those opportunities. And it's great to see them there. It's great to get to know them a little bit. My favorite of our, like, kind of interesting fellowship opportunities, though, is our church softball team. Because we go and play, and then there's also people that just show up to watch. Like, I love that. There are members of Good Shepherd's congregation that just come watch the younger guys in the congregation play softball. And that's cool, especially since a lot of the guys on the team are like kind of peripherally involved at Good Shepherd, either as preschool parents or, you know, they're college kids who are just home for the summer, and it shows them that, hey, there's some investment here. And we love seeing you. Not saying that, you know, having church sports teams is going to fix your church either, though. You have to actually create the community for that to work. Yeah. Do I have any more programs that I don't like? I'm sure I do. I mean, anything, like, so realistically, anything that meets during the day, during the week.
I feel like that's just a separate rant.
Well, I mean, sure, kind of. But anything that meets during the day, during the week is automatically going to exclude anyone that works. And, like, for some groups, that might work.
The question is, I've never come across a program that's meet Monday mornings at 11:30. I'm sure they exist. But
yeah.
That's where my reaction comes from, right?
Yeah, no, I totally get it.
Is where...
But, like, we have a Bible study midweek. There's a prayer group that meets during the day in the week. There's a quilting group that meets during the day in the week.
You're talking about my church or yours?
Apparently both. Like, the reality is the vast majority of households these days have two working parents. And if they only have one, we don't often structure our society in such a way that, like, stay-at-home parents, whether they be moms or dads, can get away to participate in something like a Bible study or a prayer group or a quilting group or whatever. That's just it's not easy to do. So if you want people who are still in their working years to be involved in stuff at your church, guess what? It means sacrificing evenings. It means sacrificing weekends. It means doing things when you would rather be doing something else.
That it does. And we don't like doing it.
Yeah.
We should, but And if you're sitting there thinking, well, what about this or what about that as far as programs, I think this might be a good way to describe them as an overarching reality. If you're thinking about something as if we can do this one thing, it's going to totally fix our problems. It's a program. You're looking at it like a silver bullet, and more than likely, it's not. I should clarify. If it's any sort of complex issue, right? If the issue is something like, well, a lot of people are struggling reading the bulletin, and the solution is to make the font bigger. Okay, you have accurately assessed the problem and a solution to it. We're talking about bigger, call them more systematic problems. Like, oh, we don't have the young adults, or oh, kids aren't getting discipled like we would really hope them to, or something like that. Because rarely are problems so simple. And the flip side of this, if someone's asking you to buy it, they're like, oh, just pay for this and it'll fix the problem. I'm highly skeptical. The only exception I can really think of, if you're going to bring in a consultant who's going to spend some significant time with your congregation and then give some advice based on that time, that I could see as, okay, that might actually be something that could help solve the problems. Because what you're doing is saying, we're going to bring in this expertise who has dealt with problems like ours before, have them look at the nuances of our specific context, and then make some suggestions based on that. Okay. So there's a little bit of a nuance there. But yeah, anytime someone's like, oh, just pay for this system and it'll fix it, it's like, no. Especially because people can tell when they've just been put into an automated system, into a plug-and-play program. And those are sometimes good. Like, sometimes they're helpful, but generally not to solve problems.
So, one thing, I was just trying to find it, but I remember a few years ago, I was listening to a podcast, and the hosts of said podcasts, it was not this podcast, it was a much higher quality podcast than this podcast.
That would be a weird way to talk about this podcast.
Yes, it would. The hosts of the podcast were talking about the making everything a program that has happened in the church. And one of the hosts specifically remembered kind of thinking back to his childhood, how growing up for him, I think he grew up in the 60s and 70s. I think he's probably about our parents' age, Josh. And he remembered going through the whole system. Everything was just programmed out for him. Early childhood, then into Sunday school, into youth group, young adults, adult groups.
Adults.
Yeah, and then, there's groups, there used to be groups for retirees and all sorts of stuff. And he looks back at that and he goes, it worked for me. But there's a lot of people that I went through these programs with that just kind of fell out.
Yeah.
So what happened? And there have been smarter people than us that have taken a look at some of these things. And I remember him talking about a survey or a study that was done, I think about 20 years ago now. But I think it's still incredibly relevant in terms of what were the key markers that led someone to stay in church. Guess how many of them were programs?
I'm going to guess none of them.
Yeah, negative of them. So step 1, weekly church attendance. Just be there, no matter what. It helps you build the routine. It helps you invest and helps you kind of get into the mindset that I need to be here. And that can help others get into that mindset. Step 2, routine time in Scripture. Who would have thunk it? Reading your Bible consistently.
Spending time in God's Word encourages you to do things God calls you to do.
Exactly. Yeah. Step 3, having a mentor in the faith. People who found someone older than them that they felt like they could go to for questions about the faith, or perhaps not necessarily older than them, but someone who's been Christian longer than them that they can go to for questions about the faith. That was important. And it had to be someone they weren't related to. That was a key. That was a key. Step 4, routinely in prayer. Again, do the things that God wants you to do and you'll be closer to God. Great. Step 5, serve regularly. This meant that the people who were in church, their families or their congregation or whatever, they had a habit and a desire to serve regularly. So it was an emphasis for them in the congregation or in the church. And I think there was a step 6 or a sixth point, but I can't remember exactly what it was. I think it might have been Christian Friends.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm all aboard that train.
Yeah. And like the people who had that had all of those things. I think there was like a 99% retention rate.
Pretty good.
There is no program that can boast a 99% retention rate. But you know what else is really really tricky about those 6 things? And Josh, you'll love this. You can't programatize them.
You're right. I do love that.
All 6 of those things, like the things that make for healthy Christians, make for healthy churches. You can't just buy a program and make it happen. You have to instill the desire to be in those things with the people that you're working on them with. Because otherwise, some of those are hard. They take dedication, they take time, they take routine. If you're not invested, you're just going to fall off the wagon.
And I think that's one of the reasons that programs have seen so much popularity. It's because in a lot of ways they make it easier.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to think through it. You don't have, there's not as much work to be done on the ground because a lot of times programs do a lot of the work for you. And it alleviates I also think it's because it alleviates some of the responsibility. It's this idea of, if this fails, it's not my fault, it's the program's fault.
Mm.
Whereas if we put ourselves out there and say, well, we're going to try and build these relationships and something doesn't work, then it's like, okay, that's on us. Which I think isn't any more true than it is for the programs. But we're fallen human people and we think about things in fallen human ways. But I think I promised myself I wasn't going to use this analogy, but my title is still Sad Hockey Fan. So I'm going to use this analogy. Okay, I'm going to paint a picture for you folks. And I'm sure I've painted it before, and I might paint it again before the end of the hockey season. Okay, last season, the Preds had a new coach, a new GM. They had sold a lot of their players. They had, the year before that, so 2 years ago, they had sold a lot of their players, built up a lot of draft capital, which if you're a big football person or a basketball person, this isn't going to make as much sense because in those drafts, a lot of times you will get players who are ready to go. Hockey, that is almost never the case. You are drafting for a player you are hoping becomes a star in 5 years or 6 years. Like, your timeline for development is
it's more similar to baseball in that regard.
I'll take your word for it. Okay, so that's where the Predators were. First half of last season went pretty bad. It was pretty bad. But then the Predators went on an 18-game point streak. They made the playoffs. They had no right to be there. They made the playoffs, and they made that playoff series look way better than they had any right to. Okay? So with that being said, there was a lot of excitement. It's like, okay, the coach's system clearly works because he took these players that, they were okay. They're professional hockey players, but there were no stars except for UC Saros. And in the offseason, this past offseason, Barry Trotz, the general manager, went out and he got Steven Stamkos, star hockey player. Jonathan Marchessault, star hockey player. Brady Shea, a little bit under the radar, but star defenseman. And he gets these contracts. And everybody's like, the Predators might just be the best team in the league right now. I don't think many people were saying that, but we were a dark horse contender for the Cup. A lot of people were putting us up in that conversation. Okay? And this season has not gone that way. We are the third worst team in the league.
Hence, sad hockey fan.
Hence, sad hockey fan if you're watching the video. And you say, do you have a point here, Josh? I'm getting to my point. Calm down. Okay? We've been doing bad, and there are voices out there in the Preds fan base that their response is, fire the coach. Ladies and gentlemen, our coach was a finalist for the Jack
Adams.
The Jack Adams Award last year for the best coach in the league. Problem is not the coach. And you say, well, trade this player. There's no one identifiable problem. If you say, what's the one reason the Preds have been bad this season? No one can honestly give you, here is the one reason. But saying fire the coach makes you feel good because you'd be doing something, and it's an easy target. Sometimes that's our view for different programs in the church. Things aren't going the way we want them to go. Things aren't going the way we think they should go. But we can't point to a single issue. And it's too hard to work our way out of it in a healthy way, in a helpful way. So we find a coach to fire. I'm not saying we fire someone. I'm saying getting the program would be firing the coach. It's easy. You feel better because you're doing something, and surely doing something is better than doing nothing. But in the end, it's not going to fix your problem.
Yeah.
This is same thing with the coach, same thing with these programs. And it's harder to say, no, you know what? We're just going to keep our nose to the grindstone. We're going to do the things God has called us to do as faithfully as we can. Address problems as they come up. And know that the Holy Spirit is going to work. Okay? Mm-hmm. That's a hard thing to do. But I suspect that you're better off in the long run doing that than you are trying all these programs. So then people get sick of them because they're like, we've done these before. They never work. It gets exhausting. Just be who God's called us.
Yeah. Just be the church.
That might be an oversimplification, but
yeah,
that's okay.
Yeah.
Anything else we need to get to on programs? I think our displeasure with them has been duly noted.
Yeah. And I will end with this caveat, and then maybe we go to empty netters. Programs can be useful because they are often full of resources to help you in certain ways. Like Josh mentioned, everyone his witness earlier. If you have a bunch of people who are reticent about doing evangelism, walking through that with them can give them some tools to help in their evangelism. But it's not going to magically make your church grow. That still takes hard work. Greg Finke has a book called Joining Jesus on His Mission, which, Josh, I think you did. I had to read it. Did you have to read it for class at some point?
I don't know if I had to. I think I did. I did read it. And he came and did a couple of presentations at the seminary while we were there, and I was definitely at those presentations.
One of my favorite lines from that book is something to the effect of, at some point you have to set down this book and go do something. And I feel like that's what we need to recognize as the church. Like, at some point, you need to stop programming everything and just be people in and amongst the people of the world, serving them, loving them as Jesus has called us to do, and bringing them the good news that Jesus has died for them and brings them forgiveness of sins. So if the programs you're using are helping you to achieve that mission, great. If they're not, take them out back, dump gasoline on them, set it on fire, have a nice big bonfire, invite over the neighbors and tell them about Jesus.
And invite people to the bonfire. Everybody likes a good bonfire.
Everybody loves a good bonfire.
Yeah. And you heard this throughout this episode, right? For each of the programs we listed, we said, well, they can be good if you're using them appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
They become a problem when they're so.
Yeah.
Yes. So what's your empty netter, Ben? What are you sending in without the goalie there?
Empty netter number one here. Recognize that you are a child of God who is called to do something for the kingdom. Don't count on the church to find a solution to everything. The organizational church. Jesus has a solution to every problem. But it might include you. So don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. Josh?
I think my empty netter is don't look for an easy solution. Just be who God has called you to be. And He'll take care of the rest.
Oh, I got one more for you.
I suppose we can make room for one more.
We're really pouring it on here. I don't know why they pulled the goalie so early. My last one.
It was John Hines. He wants to make playoffs.
That's fair. For reference, he pulled the goalie last year in a couple of overtime games that the Wild were in.
Learned a new rule because of that.
Yeah. Because he so desperately wanted to win that the extra attacker was worth the risk. So, yeah. Anyway.
The new rule, by the way, I'm going to throw it out there because we have plenty of time.
Sure.
If you go empty net in overtime and the other team wins, you forfeit the point you would have otherwise gotten for making it to overtime. So the penalty for losing is, I don't know if Hines knew that when he pulled the goal.
He did. He did.
But yep. So what's your?
My other one is pastors are not immune to just falling back on programs. So if you feel like that's what your pastor is doing, whether that's me or Josh or honestly anyone,
send them this podcast.
Well, you could send them this podcast or send them our email and this podcast. We'd be happy to talk to them. But also, like, you should talk to them yourself as a concerned Christian.
We're going to Matthew 18.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll also respond with, if they sent you this passive aggressively and didn't actually talk to you, that's their problem.
Send them season 1, episode 1 of this show.
Yeah, also that. That would be good. That would be good. That's what I got, Josh.
Well, we've been happy to host you guys for a little bit here. We hope that this podcast was interesting and or productive for you. If you appreciate spending time with us in this way, go ahead and like and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a rating. We're not going to pretend we want anything less than 5 stars. I don't know if we deserve it every episode, but come on. Over the grand scheme of things, surely you can give us 5 stars. If you thought this was helpful, or if you know someone who you think this would be helpful for, go ahead and share this episode with them specifically. We'll be totally honest with you. Our distaste for programs and includes this podcast in that we don't advertise. We don't really push it out there. We just say, hey, if you find it useful and you know people who think like you can go ahead and share it with them. And that's kind of our growth approach for CrossCheck. So blessings on your week. Brothers and sisters, go in peace. Serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.